we will learn how to build reusable component in Angular, and we will see how to pass data to our component and how to raise events from the component, and even more. So let's start. In this video, we will see how to build a reusable component API and how to let a component read data from other components by adding input property, and how to aliasing the input properties. So what is a reusable component API? Actually, in order to make a component more reusable, we need to add input and output properties to it. We use the input property to pass data or state to the component, and we use the output property to raise event from this custom component. And that's what form the custom API component. In this video, we will see how to add input properties, and in the next video, we will see how to add output properties. So let's see an example. So let's say I want to have an input field and a button. So when I click on the button, a value will appear on the input value, something like this. Well, to do this, it's pretty easy, and as we saw in the previous section about property and event binding, so I simply can bind the value property of input field to a field, I name it button value, and then I can change the button value by assigning a value on the click event of the button. So here I can go to the app component TS, and here this is the function of the click event, and inside I'm assigning a value hello world to the field button value. Okay, great. But what if the input element is not available on the same component with the button? So let me create a new component as we learned before. Okay, so let me type here ng and G for generate, C for create, and I will name the component I want to create input dash sample. Enter. Great. Let me close the terminal and let me go to the bottom sample component HTML here, and let me delete this and add an input element. Great. And now let me check the TS file of this component. So you see here the selector of my component here. So if I want to use my component inside the app component HTML, this is the selector. So I'm copying the app input sample, and let me go to the app component HTML. Okay, and let me replace the input down field by my custom component. Okay, great. So let me check the navigator. So again here we have an input DOM element and we have the bottom, but in our case here the input element exists in another component. The bottom and the input field, they're not available on the same component. So let's see how we can do the same functionality we did before. So actually, if we try to add as what we did before with the input component DOM element, if we try to add a value, something like this, this will give us an error. We cannot bind the property value of this component because it doesn't have a property named value. So let's try button value, save, and let me go to the navigator and check. Okay, let me hit F12. So I'm having an error here. The compile error is very clear. It says cannot bind to value since it's not a non-property of app input sample. So I cannot use value, I cannot bind to value property because value property is not a property for our custom component. So in order to make this component more reusable, we're going to add a support or property. So let me go to input sample HTML view and bind the value element. So let me go here and let me bind the value for the DOM element input value and assign it to a field. Let me name this field input value. Okay, great. And then let me go to the input sample component TS and declare this field. Here I'm saying that the input value is a string. Now I want to use this field in property binding expression. So I need to mark this as an input property. So to do this, I need to import the input decorator from Angular Core library like this. So I will go here and input function decorator. Then I simply add my decorator here, input. So the @input is a function decorator. I can call it as a function. In similar way, I use the decorator function of the component as we saw before. Okay, great. Now this field input value is exposed to outside. So let's back to the app HTML. Let me back here and then let me go to the app component. And here, as we explained before, the value property is not a property of the app input sample, but instead we declare the input value as an input property. So let me replace value by input value, save, and now let me check the navigator. Click. Great. So that's it. Very simple. Now let's say for some reason we decided in our input sample component to rename the field value input for refactoring reason. So let me say I want to change the field, the input value field, to my input value field. Okay, so in this case I should change this property everywhere I use this component. Well, a way to go around this is by adding aliasing input properties or a nickname. So in the input decorator, I can optionally set an alias. So to add an alias, inside the input decorator, I will add the input value. So now I don't need to go all over my application and refactor the input value to my input value. I just need to change this field name in the input sample component TS and in the input sample component HTML. So here I should bind the value to my input value instead, and that's it. So let me go to the navigator and hit click me. Great, it's working. So I will recap. With this way I can rename my field, so in the future I don't have to worry about the code that use this component as long as I keep the alias fixed. Also, if you are building a reusable component that will be distributed, we don't need to be forced to tell our clients each time we rename a field that, hey guys, you need to refactor your code. So this is the end. In this video, we saw how to build a reusable component API and how to let a component read data from other components by adding an input property, and how to aliasing the input properties.